The Victorians have long been depicted in contemporary art at the bar of the gin palace or the public house, from the hangover of the 18th century gin craze to the rise in popularity of wine and that faithful cheap drink of the millions, beer. The working classes often found their pleasure and sought to forget their hardships through alcohol. In the early 19th century, in response to popular pressure, earlier restrictions on gin production that sought to control its symptoms, vice, crime, and debauchery, were relaxed. Gin was set to make a comeback, and the drinks trade did all it could to attract people off the streets and part them from their money. Gin shops, or palaces, appeared off the back of new licenses and private investment. They were gaudy and ornate drinking establishments in comparison to the dreary beer houses, highly decorated with columns, chandeliers, and gas lights, a flashy show of respectability that was no more than a veneer for rough clientele and a rowdy atmosphere. They were hugely popular and attracted the rich and poor alike to drink spirits, but the well-to-do were screened from the riff-raff, who came in separately for their dram, before quickly moving on to the next magnet of temptation. Today, in an account by Charles Dickens, the famous 19th century novelist and social critic, you will discover the remarkable story of the Victorian gin craze, told in his Sketches, his first work, penned when he was but a young man. He illustrates everyday life and people of the time, which, intertwining fiction with fact, no doubt draws on his own personal experiences and observations to give us a vivid picture of the plight of the lower classes through characters that reveal the hard reality of life in Victorian London. Find out what a visit to these gin shops, often found in the poorest slums, was like. Meet some of the customers and learn some unusual names for gin, or blue ruin, that you could drink were you to stumble inside. Gin shops were usually bright and glitzy places. Charles Dickens describes them as perfectly dazzling, and they must have stood out like a gaudy beacon between the dark and dirty streets of some of London's most notorious neighbourhoods. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. It is a remarkable circumstance that different trades appear to partake of the disease, to which elephants and dogs are especially liable, and to run stark, staring, raving mad periodically. The great distinction between the animals and the trades is that the former run mad with a certain degree of propriety. They are very regular in their irregularities, but these trades are as eccentric as comets. Nay, worse, for no one can calculate on the recurrence of the strange appearances which betoken the disease. Moreover, the contagion is general, and the quickness with which it diffuses itself almost incredible. We will cite 2 or 3 cases in illustration of our meaning. 6 or 8 years ago, the late 1820s, the epidemic began to display itself among the linen drapers and haberdashers. The primary symptoms were an inordinate love of plate glass and a passion for gaslights and gilding. The disease gradually progressed, and at last attained a fearful height. Quiet, dusty old shops in different parts of town were pulled down. Spacious premises with stuccoed fronts and gold letters were erected instead. Floors were covered with Turkey carpets, roofs supported by massive pillars, doors knocked into windows, a dozen squares of glass into one shopman into a dozen, and there is no knowing what would have been done if it had not been fortunately discovered, just in time, that the commissioners of bankruptcy were as competent to decide such cases as the commissioners of lunacy, and that a little confinement and gentle examination did wonders. The disease abated, it died away. A year or two of comparative tranquillity ensued. Suddenly, it burst out again amongst the chemists. The symptoms were the same, with the addition of a strong desire to stick the royal arms over the shop door, and a great rage for mahogany, varnish, and expensive floor-cloth. Then the hosiers were infected, and began to pull down their shop fronts with frantic recklessness. The mania again died away, and the public began to congratulate themselves on its entire disappearance, when it burst forth with tenfold violence among the publicans and keepers of wine vaults. From that moment it has spread among them with unprecedented rapidity, exhibiting a concatenation of all the previous symptoms. Onward it has rushed to every part of town, knocking down all the old public houses, and depositing splendid mansions, stone balustrades, rosewood fittings, immense lamps, and illuminated clocks at the corner of every street. The extensive scale on which these places are established, and the ostentatious manner in which the business of even the smallest among them is divided into branches, is amusing. A handsome plate of ground glass in one door directs you to the counting-house, another to the bottle department, a third to the wholesale department, a fourth to the wine promenade, and so forth, until we are in daily expectation of meeting with a brandy bell or a whisky entrance. Then ingenuity is exhausted in devising attractive titles for the different descriptions of gin, and the dram-drinking portion of the community, as they gaze upon the gigantic black and white announcements, which are only to be equalled in size by the figures beneath them, are left in a state of pleasing hesitation between the cream of the valley, the out-and-out, the no mistake, the good for mixing, the real knock-me-down, the celebrated butter gin, the regular flare-up, and a dozen other equally inviting and wholesome liqueurs. Although places of this description are to be met with in every second street, they are invariably numerous and splendid in precise proportion to the dirt and poverty of the surrounding neighbourhood. The gin shops in and near Drury Lane, Holborn, St. Giles, Covent Garden, and Clare Market are the handsomest in London. There is more of filth and squalid misery near those great thoroughfares than in any part of this mighty city. We will endeavour to sketch the bar of a large gin shop and its ordinary customers, for the edification of such of our readers as may not have had opportunities of observing such scenes, and on the chance of finding one well suited to our purpose, we will make for Drury Lane, through the narrow streets and dirty courts which divide it from Oxford Street, and that classical spot adjoining the brewery at the bottom of Tottenham Court Road, best known to the initiated as the Rookery, the slum of St. Giles. The filthy and miserable appearance of this part of London can hardly be imagined by those, and there are many such, who have not witnessed it. Wretched houses with broken windows patched with rags and paper, every room let out to a different family, and in many instances to two or even three, fruit and sweet stuff manufacturers in the cellars, barbers and red herring vendors in the front parlours, cobblers in the back, a bird fancier in the first floor, 3 families on the second, starvation in the attics, Irishmen in the passage, a musician in the front kitchen, and a charwoman and 5 hungry children in the back one. Filth everywhere, a gutter before the houses and a drain behind, clothes drying and slops emptying from the windows. Girls of 14 or 15, with matted hair, walking about barefoot, and in white greatcoats, almost their only covering. Boys of all ages, in coats of all sizes, and no coats at all. Men and women, in every variety of scanty and dirty apparel, lounging, scolding, drinking, smoking, squabbling, fighting, and swearing. You turn the corner. What a change! All is light and brilliancy. The hum of many voices issues from that splendid gin shop which forms the commencement of the 2 streets opposite, and the gay building with the fantastically ornamented parapet, the illuminated clock, the plate-glass windows surrounded by stucco rosettes, and its profusion of gaslights in richly gilt burners is perfectly dazzling when contrasted with the darkness and dirt we have just left. The interior is even gayer than the exterior. A bar of French polished mahogany, elegantly carved, extends the whole width of the place, and there are 2 side aisles of great casks, painted green and gold, enclosed within a light brass rail, and bearing such inscriptions as Old Tom, 549, Young Tom, 360, Samson, 1421, the figures agreeing, we presume, with gallons, understood. Beyond the bar is a lofty and spacious saloon, full of the same enticing vessels, with a gallery running round it, equally well furnished. On the counter, in addition to the usual spirit apparatus, are 2 or 3 little baskets of cakes and biscuits, which are carefully secured at top with wickerwork, to prevent their contents being unlawfully abstracted. Behind it are 2 showily dressed damsels with large necklaces, dispensing the spirits and compounds. They are assisted by the ostensible proprietor of the concern, a stout, coarse fellow in a fur cap, put on very much on one side to give him a knowing air, and to display his sandy whiskers to the best advantage. The 2 old washerwomen, who are seated on the little bench to the left of the bar, are rather overcome by the headdresses and haughty demeanour of the young ladies who officiate. They receive their half-quartern of gin and peppermint with considerable deference, prefacing a request for one of them soft biscuits, with a "Just be good enough, ma'am." They are quite astonished at the impudent air of the young fellow in a brown coat and bright buttons, who, ushering in his 2 companions, and walking up to the bar in as careless a manner as if he had been used to green and gold ornaments all his life, winks at one of the young ladies with singular coolness, and calls for a Curvorton and a 3-out glass, just as if the place were his own. "Gin for you, sir," says the young lady when she has drawn it, carefully looking every way but the right one, to show that the wink had no effect upon her. "For me, Mary, my dear," replies the gentleman in brown. "My name ain't Mary, as it happens," says the young girl, rather relaxing as she delivers the change. "Well, if it ain't, it ought to be," responds the irresistible one. "All the Marys as ever I see was handsome gals." Here the young lady, not precisely remembering how blushes are managed in such cases, abruptly ends the flirtation by addressing the female in the faded feathers who has just entered, and who, after stating explicitly, to prevent any subsequent misunderstanding, that this gentleman pays, calls for a glass of port wine and a bit of sugar. Those old men who came in, just to have a drain, finished their 3rd quartern a few seconds ago. They have made themselves crying drunk, and the fat, comfortable-looking elderly women, who had a glass of rum srub each, having chimed in with their complaints on the hardness of the times, one of the women has agreed to stand a glass round, jocularly observing that grief never mended no broken bones, and as good people's very scarce, what I says is, make the most on 'em, and that's all about it. A sentiment which appears to afford unlimited satisfaction to those who have nothing to pay. It is growing late, and the throng of men, women, and children, who have been constantly going in and out, dwindles down to 2 or 3 occasional stragglers, cold, wretched-looking creatures, in the last stage of emaciation and disease. The knot of Irish labourers at the lower end of the place, who have been alternately shaking hands with and threatening the life of each other for the last hour, become furious in their disputes, and finding it impossible to silence one man, who is particularly anxious to adjust the difference, they resort to the expedient of knocking him down and jumping on him afterwards. The man in the fur cap and the potboy rush out. A scene of riot and confusion ensues. Half the Irishmen get shut out, and the other half get shut in. The potboy is knocked among the tubs in no time. The landlord hits everybody, and everybody hits the landlord. The barmaids scream, the police come in. The rest is a confused mixture of arms, legs, staves, torn coats, shouting and struggling. Some of the party are borne off to the station house, and the remainder slink home. We have sketched this subject very slightly, not only because our limits compel us to do so, but because, if it were pursued farther, it would be painful and repulsive. Well-disposed gentlemen and charitable ladies would alike turn with coldness and disgust from a description of the drunken besotted men and wretched broken-down miserable women, who form no inconsiderable portion of the frequenters of these haunts, forgetting, in the pleasant consciousness of their own rectitude, the poverty of the one and the temptation of the other. Gin-drinking is a great vice in England, but wretchedness and dirt are a greater, and until you improve the homes of the poor, or persuade a half-famished wretch not to seek relief in the temporary oblivion of his own misery, with the pittance which, divided among his family, would furnish a morsel of bread for each, gin-shops will increase in number and splendour. If temperance societies would suggest an antidote against hunger, filth, and foul air, or could establish dispensaries for the gratuitous distribution of bottles of Lethe water, gin palaces would be numbered among the things that were.